You're listening to the Better People Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Warner, and also with me today is Rhonda Ramirez, licensed professional counselor out of Central Texas. And today, our topic is about finding what is considered, I guess, balanced mental health. And this is an area that Rhonda can definitely answer from a counseling standpoint, because at some point in counseling, the desire for both parties is that you can say the counseling is done its job and everything's perfect. No, I'm kidding, not perfect, but everything has reached a level of balance. And so I guess that kind of begs a question in your professional opinion, what is considered balanced mental health?
Yeah, that's a big idea for me. I think it's never exactly balanced. I think we're always kind of moving, a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. And I think it's identifying where we might need to just move one or two steps this direction or one or two steps that direction. I think I am a person who really believes that we should always be striving or always be learning. I don't think that we necessarily grow at a consistent rate. I think growth happens in spurts. And so that idea of therapy being a place where you can grow, I think that you're growing in spurts, and then sometimes you need a little time off to figure out, let's use all the things that I've learned and see if I can keep that kind of balance of mental health for myself. Oftentimes we go to therapy, we get really comfortable, and hopefully we start out uncomfortable and then get more comfortable with our therapist so that we are working towards a goal. And then maybe we might get towards that goal and you're like, okay, well, that feels like we've accomplished that goal. We may find more things, but maybe I should take a tiny little break and kind of use all the tools that I've learned to accomplish this goal and see, can I sustain this kind of mental health balance without therapy? Am I in a place to kind of do it on my own for a little bit? And it doesn't never has to be forever. You can always come back. You can always find a new therapist if that therapist has moved. But that idea of balance, I think, is always the thing we're looking for. Because it doesn't matter what the subject is, you can go too much to the left or too much to the right. Let's say you start exercising as a way to manage stress. Great. So you're creating a little bit of balance in your life. You're managing your stress by having some physical exertion. Well, if you do too much of that exercise, it can be unhealthy. If you are changing your life, if you get to the point where you're doing too much, and it becomes unhealthy. On the other side, there's always if we do it too little, it is also unhealthy. If we're not moving at all, it's an unhealthy thing too. So I think balance is always trying to kind of find the middle between the two unhealthy ends of the spectrum, because too much is always unhealthy, and too little is generally unhealthy.
So as a counselor, are you looking at the beginning? Are you setting goals for the client?
Yes.
So you're setting goals and you're monitoring.
I am. Okay, let me backtrack a little. Personally, I am not setting goals, but together I ask my clients to come in with, what do you want to work on? What are your personal goals? And then we kind of together talk about them and shape them. This is the way I do it. And shape them to something that we can really identify as, okay, we we will know that we have completed this goal. It's measurable because I won't have a panic attack every day, which that would be really rough. I would feel awful for that person. But, if that was the goal, is to decrease the number of panic attacks, then we would kind of work towards figuring out some tools. But the client always has autonomy. So the person that is coming in I'm always going to look to them to see which direction we're going. I'm not setting any goals because I am not them. And I do not know what's best for their life choices. But I will definitely help them figure that out. And say, okay, well, what do you want? What direction do you want to go? Do you have goals? Let's figure out how to set some goals. So in my head, and this is the analogy I use all the time. As a counselor, it's like I'm sitting in the passenger seat of the car. I help with the map. I help with figuring out where we're going. I help and look and see if there's anything in front of us that might be an obstacle. But the person that's the driver is always the driver. So they're making the final decision. They have an idea of where they're going. And so I just figure, I can give some perspective on your life, and I am not emotionally connected to the situations in your life. So it's easier for us to give perspective because I don't love your grandmother like you do, or I don't, those kinds of, or your best friend is not my best friend. So it's easier for me to say, wow, that's kind of hard. Have you considered talking to them like this? Or that sounds pushy, or whatever it is,
Right. Well, it's a third party perspective. Basically,
right. It's
you're not shaded by what you know about that person other than what the patient tells you or client tells you. But
right.
Pardon me, in this case, it's a matter of you're not connected to the situation. So you're able to give a third party point of view to say, hey,
right.
I don't think that's healthy.
Correct. Have you considered that probably hasn't been healthy for a long time? Those kinds of questions. And so when you talk about balance, I also think about those kind of questions kind of helping us direct that mental health balance in our own head. And sometimes we have to learn the questions to ask ourselves, and that's, I do a lot of that in therapy as well. It's like, how do you know you're going in the right direction? How do you know that's what you want? Like, let's figure that out, And my best and most basic question is it healthy for you to do that? Is it unhealthy? And so that balance is figuring out really what kind of internal monologue kind of helps you figure out how to make those decisions and how to keep that balance, how to keep pretty close to that balance most days, We all have times where we go, our emotions go up and down all day long, probably. But in general, we shouldn't have the extremes all the time. Does that make sense?
To me, it does. Basically, okay. You're looking if a client comes in and says, hey, and they're known for, and they're using as an example, let's say panic attacks, or they're fighting an addiction, or they're right. You are looking for the goals that they have outlined that they're looking for. You kind of act as you help interpret that roadmap to say, yeah, it looks like that's a good decision. You're heading in the right direction. Or,
for sure.
Or hold on. I don't think that's going to be good for what you're trying to accomplish. Let's talk about that. And so what your objective is, generally it sounds like, is you're trying to, if there are peaks and valleys for this particular person, you're trying to find balance to say, okay, yeah, you're going to occasionally have this peak and occasionally have this valley. You don't want to live there. And so let's find a way, that you can be balanced and you feel like you can navigate yourself out of that situation.
I would say the goal. I would say the goal for any therapist, if this is not their goal, they're probably not in a great place. But the goal for any therapist is to kind of work themselves out of a job. That's always my goal. Like, you should not need me for the rest of your life. We should be able to learn how to kind of gauge and manage and ask those questions of yourself without somebody having to be there. Now, there will be times, you might have to come back and say, well, I'm not very clear on this, or I need to kind of relearn how to use some of these tools in a better way, because as we grow and mature, we do change. And so it is something that you have to kind of relearn. I would never use the tools that I used in my 20s now in my mid-40s. Like, it's very different. I also don't, I would say, freak out, but I don't get as panicky as I did in my 20s. So, I have learned to kind of manage that a little bit better.
Nor do I like to hang around with people in their 20s,
Exactly.
Because they're different people.
I would say, I am much more appreciative of age than some people, but that age and experience gives us, hopefully, the ability to kind of manage some of those things. So we might have to relearn a different way to use some of our tools, or we might have to learn a new way, a new set of tools, because we're at a different place in our life. And then there's some tools that, I will probably use till I die. The fact that sometimes I have to just stop, turn around, and take some really deep breaths, I will probably never stop using. The idea of sometimes I have to step outside of the building just for a minute to get some clarity, I probably will never stop using. It just kind of depends on where you're at on your journey, which seems so kind of hippie-ish, but that's kind of the way it is.
That is, that could be another episode. I've wondered.
That could be, yeah.
That is an interesting, concept of, we talk about, millennials, and now we've got the zennials. Well, I guess
Zennials,
which is, I guess, the pre-millennial mindset, and then now you've got the up and coming Zoomers and
right.
the alphas, which were born in the 2010s, and so it's just fascinating to see where mentally, we're going to land. It's hard to say that all generations have completely different mindsets. Actually, we all have similar mindsets. It's just that over the years, each generation has learned the downfalls from the previous, and hopefully they fix it in the new. And we'll just, like, my kids are going to look at the millennial generation and be like, ugh, we're going to, there's something about this we didn't like, whatever it may be. And I can't
right.
tell you what it would be, but it's a constant improvement, self-improvement, I think, within the generations. And
for sure.
So you're talking about tools that a 20-year-old would use versus a 30-year-old versus a 40-year-old. It's not that the person in their 80s and 90s doesn't have stress. It's just that they've learned in some healthy ways and maybe in some unhealthy ways, but they've learned how to cope with that. And they've built their coping mechanisms behind it. I look at my grandmother,
Correct.
who was the kindest person I can ever imagine. And talking to my dad, he says, yeah, she was actually pretty much always like that. She was very, never panicked. And of course, she grew up in the Great Depression era. And so she had a different view of material items and helping people, because she said, well, there was a time that we had nothing. And, we all helped each other. So from racism
it's hard to panic about. I would say it's hard to panic about little things that are happening now when you've experienced the Great Depression.
Right. Well, and what I was going to say is,
things
like racism to her made no sense, because when her point was, when we were in the thick of it, and she was, you look at Grapes of Wrath, the movie and the book, it was almost about her family in a way, that was where her family was from. And you didn't have time to you couldn't be racist. You had to survive. And so for her, that was always a foreign concept of how can people be racist, because of that. of what she had to deal with. And so it's just fascinating. I always encourage anyone of a younger generation to talk to somebody of a much older generation just to see how they viewed things in life now versus, and even, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm also a proponent of always having a friend who is older and a friend who is younger by at least 10 years, because your perspective, you get great perspective with age, and you get great energy from the young.
Exactly. And I see, I same agreement there. I have a friend who's in her mid-20s, and here are the problems she describes. Like, here's somebody who is still in their early stages of life of an adult, and to see that optimism. Not to say that
right.
And then you have people like me who've been like, well, it's over, but
right. No,
no more dreams for Thomas.
Coworker. Yeah, exactly. I was talking to a coworker today, and we were talking about, I wish we had the carefree attitude we had in our 20s, because we didn't think about all the risk. We just went out and did stuff. And I kind of miss that carefree attitude that I had. But also, I really like the place that I'm in now, where, I feel stable. I own a house. Those kinds of things that also kind of give you a grounding, or you have a family, or you have a career instead of just multiple jobs, or, some of those things give you grounding that you didn't have in your 20s that I probably would have liked then as well. But I definitely miss the carefree, not even thinking about the risk, just go ahead and do it kind of thing. Now, some of those landed in bad decisions, but a lot of them were not bad decisions. Some of them were just fun.
Well, and that's the funny thing is I look at the decisions that I probably could have made a better decision on. I've always wondered, it's the philosophical question of, if you could go back in time, would you change it? Honestly, for me, no.
Yeah,
I wouldn't. And I know that sounds, you're like, well, you could have stopped this from happening, or you could have prevented this from happening in your family. And I'm like, well, I could have. First off, that's not a possibility right now to do so. Right. But even if it was, I look back, I have my sons, and I have what I have now because of decisions that I've made.
Right.
Right. And because of those mistakes, to say, well, here's what happened when I did this. If I never learned from it, then I can't say that I found, going back to what we're talking about, that balance,
That balance, exactly.
And I think there are terrible, terrible things that happen to people sometimes that, we look at trauma and items like that. Right. And there are terrible things, and I'm not going to go up to somebody who's dealt with that and say, oh, it was all for good. No, I mean, you don't tell that to somebody, but it definitely changes who you are. And either good or bad, it changes, your experiences change you. And it's all perspective situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it is that balance is created, I think, mostly through our lifespan. Hopefully if we're aware and we're learning about ourselves, the goal is to be more balanced the older we get, I think.
Right. Well, my own father's a different guy now than he was 10, 15 years ago. The concepts he talks about now are different than what he would have talked about when I was a much younger kid. In some he's come full circle, or come, I guess, 180 on some of his opinions on things. And and it's just interesting to think, well, 10 years ago you wouldn't have said that, and it's because he's gone through multiple just life adjustments.
Situation.
Yeah, and it just become natural as you age. And so
it just happens.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we are actually out of time again. I don't know funny how that happens. But so this has been a fun topic as well. I want to invite people that are listening that if you do have a topic idea, go ahead and send it in at hello@betterpeoplepodcast.com. You can go to our newly launched site, betterpeoplepodcast.com, and it's got some awesome ways to get in contact with us through there. They'll go to us directly, and if you have questions, let us know. We'll try to talk about it in a future episode.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it. So with that
Yes,
said,
sir.
yeah, we're still working on how to exit the show. We're still working on that. I haven't got it down yet because I don't want to say,
That's
okay,
all
goodbye,
right.
folks. Click. It's got to be a nice transition out, and we'll get there one day. So, as I said earlier, you've been listening to the Better People Podcast. Send us an email at hello@betterpeoplepodcast.com. Visit us on social media. And as always, share us with your friends. Give us a share if you're on our Facebook page or if you've your favorite podcast app. Send it out. See what someone thinks. We'd like to hear your opinions as well. With that said, thanks for listening.